Hello, my English students. So this video is a continuation of the punctuation and formatting video series slash playlist slash English 9 Unit 4 grammar lessons. So in this video, what we're going to cover is comma usage, particularly with commas that separate things. So commas have a lot of different functions in our writing. Sometimes they're used to actually like enclose things together. This video, we're going to talk about ways that commas are used to separate different elements of our writing. So let's dive in. Whoopsie daisy. Oh well. So one thing I just want to share with all of you, in my opinion, commas are very important. Their job is to separate different parts of sentences to avoid confusing our readers. That's what it says behind my face. Actually, maybe I can move this. Our reader. So the job of a comma is to, let me just put myself on there. The job of a comma is to separate parts of sentences so that our ideas don't all just like clump together. Because if we just have ideas that are just kind of thrown together without any type of separation whatsoever in a sentence, it can sometimes really confuse our reader depending on the complexity of our sentences. So what I mean by this, next page. There we go. So what I mean by this, we have the sentence, he ate. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. He ate. We also have, we can build on that sentence and we can add, in this case, a direct object. He ate the food. Oh, go back. There we go. He ate the food. This sentence is still pretty short, not too convoluted with a bunch of different ideas. It still makes sense even without commas. Let's move on to the next sentence. He ate all the beans, squash, pie, and bananas as quickly as he could. Okay, I think we could still kind of understand what's going on behind this sentence, but at this point, I think some commas would be helpful because we've got a lot of different pieces, right? We've got all these different foods that were being eaten. I gotta stop clicking things. We've got all these different foods that are being eaten. Ooh, there's a pointer. Can I use this? Haha, I like this. This feels cool. Oh, that's not gonna work. Oh no, my pointer's gone. Come back. Oh, there we go. He ate all the beans, squash, pie, and bananas as quickly as he could. So in this case, we've got this huge chunk of things that are being brought into the sentence that we can still kind of make some sense out of it, but commas would be helpful to separate those items for our readers. Unable to wait for dinner, he ate all the beans, squash, pie, and bananas as quickly as he could. Same thing with this next one. We've got a bunch of ideas coming through here. We could, as the reader, really pick through ourselves to understand the focus of this sentence. But as the writer, we want to make it easy for our reader to do that. We want to do that extra work for our reader so that they're not stuck rereading our writing and trying to make sense of it. So, commas separate items within sentences in order to make it easy for our readers to understand. So this video is going to go over when to use commas in order to separate elements of sentences. Now, the first thing that we are going to talk about is items in a list. And so I want to just mention this, just kind of drop it in here, a note about the Oxford comma. So the Oxford comma is this comma right here. When you have items in a list, actually, let me go ahead. When you have items in a list or in a series, you put a comma after each item of that list, right? And then right before you go to that last item, you use a conjunction, usually and, sometimes or, in your listed items. Now, all of these commas are necessary, but some people think, and there are some styles of writing that say this last comma before the and to end a list, we can take out and we don't need that. This one comma right here is called the Oxford comma. Now, I want to make a case for the value of the Oxford comma because it avoids confusion for our readers. When we have this first sentence, I ate all the pie, apple, and squash. Now, we can still pick apart in this sentence and go, oh, okay, they probably ate all of the pie, all of the apples, and all of the squash. But because there is no Oxford comma here, this could also be taken a different way. We could also take this sentence as I ate all the pie, the apple pie, and the squash pie. So with that Oxford comma gone, we're not being quite as clear with our reader as we could be with that comma in. I ate all the pie, apple, and squash. Then we know those are three separate pieces, but otherwise when we're missing that Oxford comma, we might categorize these two under the types of pie that they ate. So in order to avoid confusion, I'm going to say use that Oxford comma, because just use it. Just do it because your teacher said so. All right. So first category that we use commas in to separate elements of sentences are in lists or series. So here's an example of what that looks like. You'll see these are just single items that are being listed. We've got some nouns here. I like books, movies, picnics, and oranges. We have commas to separate each category, each part of that, in order to indicate to our reader these are separate individual parts of the list. We can also separate verbs. I ate, swam, read, and walked. So these are indicating those individual actions that occurred within that list. Again, we want to separate each individual piece with a comma to show our reader these are individual parts of this list. I am tired, hungry, and lazy. These are examples of adjectives being separated into a list or into a series of items. Again, we use commas to separate those items from each other to indicate to our reader that these are working individually. We could also separate phrases and clauses with commas. So I went to the store, comma, ate some apples, comma, and read a book. So in this case, we want to group together, went to the store, ate some apples, and read a book. We want to group those phrases together, and then we want to separate those phrases from each other in the list with our commas. Same thing here. I found some food in the fridge. Whoopsies. In the fridge. Then we want to separate that from the next item, which is in the cupboard. We want to separate that from the next item, which is in the garage. So those commas separate those individual items, and those items can be individual words or they can be phrases. We just want to make sure that we are being clear for our reader on what items are separating and what items we are not separating. If we would take this comma after fridge out, it would read, I found some food in the fridge in the cupboard, which would indicate to our reader that the food was in the fridge, which was in the cupboard, because we don't have this comma to separate. We want to put that comma in to avoid confusing our reader, to show them these two are two separate things. All right, one other thing to note about lists and series. If you, sometimes stylistically, authors and writers will do this, they will repeat the conjunction, I read and swam and read some more. So if you repeat the conjunction between your list items, that's okay. If you do that, you do not need the comma. So if you do not repeat your conjunction, I went to the store and ate some apples and read a book. If you choose not to repeat the conjunction, like here, where we don't have and in the middle, then you do commas. But if you choose to repeat the conjunction, such as here, then you do not do commas. Another thing to note, we want to, with our commas and our listing, group single entities together and separate individual pieces from each other. So in this case, I want a burger and fries. This is being considered something grouped together, a burger and fries. That's one meal. But then we have it separated with this comma from the next meal group, fish and chips, comma, or eggs and bacon. So what we're doing in this list is we're categorizing burger and fry, fish and chips, eggs and bacon, but we're separating those individual categories. So there are tons of ways that you can do these lists. What you just want to make sure is that your commas are separating the individual elements of the list itself. All right, so that was the first one, elements in a list or in a series of things. Anytime, I should mention, anytime you have 3 or more items that you are listing, you need to put a comma between them to indicate that. Again, unless you are repeating the conjunction, which only do for stylistic purposes. Otherwise, it gets really wordy. All right, the second time you might see a comma to separate things in a sentence is when you have 2 adjectives next to each other that are modifying a noun. She walked through the busy, congested store. These are 2 adjectives, both being used to describe the noun store. Because we have them right next to each other and there's no word in between them, we want to put a comma there to let our reader know to separate those two words and to apply each of them individually to the description of store. Same thing with the next sentence. I ate the delicious, nutritious meal. Now, one thing to note, you could remove these commas and in their place put the word and. She walked through the busy and congested store. I ate the delicious and nutritious meal. It could also work that way if you didn't want to use the comma and you wanted to add the word and. But if you want to make your writing more concise and take out the word and, you'll need to replace it with a comma in order to separate those two adjectives. Sometimes you do not put commas between adjectives. So here's that example again of when you do put commas between adjectives. Here is an example of when you do not put a comma between two adjectives that are modifying a noun. It was a dark winter night. And that's because these two adjectives are modifying a different element of the noun. Now, a quick way to determine whether or not you should put a comma between adjectives or whether or not you shouldn't is to use that and strategy that I just mentioned earlier. So if you can put and, I'll start moving that so it goes away. If you can put the word and between the adjectives and it makes sense, the sentence makes sense, then use a comma. But if you can't, no comma. Don't put that comma in. So I ate the delicious and nutritious meal. Adding that and between delicious and nutritious makes sense and sounds good. So then I would, if I wanted to take and out, I would use a comma in its place. If I were to say it was a dark and winter night, that just kind of doesn't sound right. That doesn't really make sense. It doesn't kind of flow. It has a sound that is off to it. Because of that, we know that we do not need to put a comma between these two adjectives. They can be next to each other without that comma separation. So, and test can sometimes tell you whether or not you need to put a comma between two adjectives. Otherwise, there are a couple other times when you don't need a comma to separate adjectives. One is when you have numbers. Sometimes numbers are used as adjectives. So I want 3 blue bunnies, or I want 4 trees. I want 5 cookies. When you have a number followed by an adjective and both of them are again modifying your noun, you do not need a comma to separate because they're modifying two completely different things. And if you'll note, the and thing doesn't work. I want 3 and blue bunnies. So you do not need to put a comma to separate those. Same thing with size. The big blue sky is beautiful. Because big is indicating size, we do not need to separate it with a comma from the adjective blue. This, although, is one of those exceptions with the and rule. The big and blue sky is beautiful. It technically still works with and, but because big is indicating size, it's describing a different element of sky than what blue is, we do not need a comma to separate. It is the same thing if you were referring to the shape of something or to the age of something. The circular silver tray clanged onto the floor. The new suede shoes are perfect because one of those nouns or one of those adjectives are modifying the shape or the age of a noun. If they are followed by another adjective, we do not need to separate them with commas. But otherwise, any other time, if the and policy works, if you could put and between it and it makes sense, separate it with an adjective. All right. Let's keep going ahead. I'll put what I'll do, by the way, because I know this video is getting long. There's a lot of elements to cover with commas and that separate in sentences. I will put in timestamps so that you'll know where to go in the video for certain parts that you need. All right, compound sentences. So this is the third reason that you would use a comma in a sentence to separate elements. And whoopsies, I didn't highlight these. So when compound sentences are two complete sentences, two individual clauses that you combine together and put them into one whole sentence. You can do this, but you have to do some very specific things in order to correctly connect the sentences. If not, if you don't do these things, then it's going to be a run-on sentence. It's going to confuse your reader. So, I eat apples. I use them to make apple pie. These are two complete sentences. I use them to make apple pie. I eat apples. To combine these sentences and make them compound, we need first a comma to indicate the separation between the first independent clause, the first complete sentence, and the second complete sentence. And we also need a coordinating conjunction to indicate the relationship between the first complete sentence and the second complete sentence. So, I eat apples, comma, and I use them to make apple pie. Same thing here, just different coordinating conjunction. I won't go to the store, comma, nor will I buy that movie. So again, complete sentence, I won't go to the store. Complete sentence, I buy that movie, or I won't buy that movie, I guess this would be rewritten too. But because they are two individual complete sentences, we use a comma and a coordinating conjunction to separate them. Put your clothes away, comma, or I might just take them. So again, two complete sentences, put your clothes away, I might just take them. To combine them into a compound sentence, we must have a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Here is a list, by the way, of those coordinating conjunctions. Again, if you forgot what they are, you can also look up any simple Google search will show you what these are too. One thing to note about compound sentences, so when you have the complete sentences on either side, I eat apples and I use them to make apple pie, we use the comma with that coordinating conjunction. If we take out, in these examples, the subjects of the sentences, we take out here, and again, we take out down here in these blue colored sentences, because we took out the subjects of those sentences, this is no longer a complete sentence on its own. So notice that we keep the coordinating conjunction, but we take out that comma. I eat apples and use them to make apple pie. So once if one of the sentences on either side of the coordinating conjunction is incomplete, we do not do a comma. I won't go to the store, nor will I buy that movie. I won't go to the store or buy that movie. So again, subject is gone. So now this is no longer a complete sentence on its own, which means we no longer put a comma here. So if it's a complete sentence on both sides, comma. If it's not a complete sentence on both sides, and if it's just a complete sentence on one side, no comma. All right, next time that you would incorporate or bring in commas into your writing. Introductory structure. So this is an introductory structure is a word or a phrase at the beginning of the sentence that comes before the subject of the sentence. So if you'll see in this case, we've got single words as introductory phrases. No, I won't follow you. We'll see the subject of the sentence is right here. I won't follow you, but we've got this word coming before it. No. In this case, yes, I did eat the last cookie. Again, we've got this word coming before the subject of the sentence, so that is an introductory structure. Wait, what did you say? In this case, because this is a question, it's an inverted sentence, so we've actually got the subject and the predicate meshed together. But again, before we reach that inverted main clause of the sentence, we have this word beforehand. And because of that, we want to separate it with a comma to indicate that separation between that introductory word and the main clause, the subject and the predicate of the sentence. Same thing with prepositional phrases. After the manager walked in, I told him what happened. So here's our subject of the sentence. It's the person doing the thing in the main clause of the sentence. But we have this phrase beforehand that's modifying the time frame of when this happens before the main clause of the sentence. Because of that, we want to separate it from the main clause of the sentence with a comma to indicate that separation for our reader. While the movie was playing, we ate popcorn. Same thing, we've got our main clause right here, but we have this phrase beforehand that's giving our reader some clues as to what's going on while the main clause is happening. But because it's not part of that main clause, we want to separate it. Under the old bridge where I used to bike, I found my book. Same thing here. We've got this long phrase before we come to the subject of the sentence. So because of that, we want to separate the two with a comma. Same thing with participial phrases. Waiting for the manager to arrive, I tapped my foot. Swimming under the blue lights, I felt like I was in a movie. Because these prepositional phrases are coming at the front of the sentence before we reach the subject, we put in, participial phrases, because they're coming before the subject, we put a comma to separate them. Same thing with adverbial clauses. As we left the store, the security bell went off. So, kind of rule of thumb when it comes to introductory structures, if you have a phrase, something that is not a complete sentence, before you reach the main subject of the sentence, you more likely than not will be setting it off with a comma. Sometimes you don't, depending on sometimes the length of the introductory phrase or the type of phrase that it is, but for the most part, you'll be setting them off with commas. And then the last reason that you would use commas to separate elements in a sentence would be when you come across dates, addresses, or writing letters to people. So you'll see in the first list under dates, when you are listing days of the week, year dates, day dates, the number dates, you separate those with commas from each other. On Tuesday, comma, December 2nd, comma, 2019, comma, and now we have the rest of the sentence. So a ton of commas going on there. You separate the day of the week from the month and the date. Notice that the month and the date are not separated. These two always just are lumped right together. December 2nd, December 20th, April 3rd. You will always put those two right next to each other with no separation, but the day of the week is separated with a comma from the month and the date, and the month and the date is separated with a comma from the year. Now, when you're just writing just the date out itself, you follow these rules, Tuesday, December 2nd, 2019. If you are integrating a date into a sentence in this example, you, again, put those commas where they're supposed to be within the date itself. And then at the end, after that year mark, you also put a comma before you continue with the sentence. Addresses, same thing when you separate different components. So the street address, so the number and the street name, that all goes together. And then depending on whether or not you're writing a letter or if you're writing the address in something, if you're writing a letter, obviously the city and the state and the zip code will go underneath here. But when they're written into a sentence, after the street address, you put a comma, then you list the city, and you put a comma, then you list the state. And if you have more sentence after that, you put a comma again after the state before moving ahead. And lastly, when it comes to letters, so when you are addressing someone in a letter, so when you start your letter, you say dear or dearest, you will use a comma after addressing that person. Sometimes you'll see in my emails to you, I'll say hi with your name next to it, and then I'll put a comma. That is the proper way to introduce or address your reader of your letter or your email. So the name of the person and then a comma, and then you'll enter down onto that new line and start writing your letter. Then at the end, when you close your letter and you sign off on it, you again use one of these words to say goodbye, that I don't remember what they're called, and you put a comma after them with your name below. So sincerely, yours truly, regards, love. After each of those, again, you put a comma, and that's just to indicate the separation between your name at the end. All right, and that, I believe, is the last, yep, that's the last slide. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, anything to do with commas that separate, reach out, let me know. Otherwise, the next video lesson will be on commas that enclose things. So commas are crazy, everyone. They're used to separate items in sentences. They're also sometimes used to group things together, depending on the purpose and the function of our sentence.